Alrighty, so welcome to the first video, I guess, for this new channel. Now, for those who are aware that I already have another channel, you might be wondering what this one is for. So I'll just, give a quick kind of overview for why I even have this channel and what I plan on doing with it and everything. But yeah, so the other channel is many of you are already familiar with, is specifically on Reformed Orthodoxy and Reformed Scholasticism. Sometimes it broadens out to just early modern scholasticism in general, but you get the point. Like it's the majority of it is theological. Well, it's all theological, but and the majority of that is specifically Reformed. Whereas with this channel, that is not going to be the case, right? This is going to be a little more broad. So yeah, I'll just be engaging with more topics than just Reformed stuff, and maybe even more than just theological stuff in general. So this will give me a kind of medium to express my thoughts if there's something that I kind of want to discuss that I don't think is maybe fitting for the other channel that I have, since that one is more of a it's I use slides, and it feels more of like presentation type channel with the slides and everything. And I've had interviews as well, if you've seen, with people on as well. So yeah, this one is going to be a bit of a different style. I also probably will include things like responses or just engaging with other videos that I've seen before, because sometimes there might be people that agree with beliefs of mine, and they may see one of these videos that does not concern them or create any doubts in their mind, but um, it does seem to be something that they want to be addressed, and they notice that something about it seems off, right? The argumentation seems poor, and it seems like they're getting things incorrect, but they don't know how to pinpoint what those things are, and they don't know how to respond to them. So they want someone else to, I guess, do it for them, or yeah, just to help them out. But moving on to the actual discussion for today, there's a lot that I think is wrong with what people call the apologetics type circles or spaces that a lot of us have found ourselves in over the years. But related to that topic is the fact that there are these various little things that people do at times in these spaces that are just like these weird characteristics or habits or just strange behavior, whatever you want to call it. It's these things that you see in these spaces from the people that are having these conversations that really comes off as obnoxious, um, and it demonstrates that a lot of this kind of field is pretty much a joke. It's not serious discourse. So I'll be giving a few examples of what are the kind of things I have in mind. And I'm assuming that plenty of other people have seen these things as well and can testify that they are very annoying. So first, there is the complaint that some people have about picking and choosing, as they call it. Sometimes, I'll give an example, right? Sometimes you might cite or refer to some figure that another group deems to be pretty authoritative or at least significant, right? They give their words some kind of weight. For example, if I'm having a conversation with, say, a Roman Catholic on predestination, especially if this is a layman and is not too familiar with their own controversies about this issue. If I'm having a conversation with someone like that, and they are to say that unconditional election or predestination ante previso merito, that those are condemned by the Catholic Church, right? Especially if they've like read a Catholic Answers article or something like that, and they get this impression that their church condemns unconditional election. If I'm in a scenario like that, and then I say, well, no, actually, this is not a condemned teaching by the magisterium, and it's been affirmed by obviously Augustine himself and also medieval scholastics, notably Aquinas, right? Especially being that he's a doctor of the church. Of course, not everyone, you don't have to agree with everything that Aquinas says, hence the various schools of thought that you have within Catholicism. But he does carry some weight to a lot of people, especially on the lay popular level. Aquinas is typically someone that laymen are more familiar with than, say, Scotus or anybody else, really. Not to say that they differ in this regard, but just to say that they care what Aquinas says, right? That name goes around a lot, even among atheists, right, or skeptics. Being that that's the case, they are very hostile to the idea that people within their own church, within their own tradition, have taught something that they have unfortunately deemed to be uniquely reformed, or as they'll call it, right, Calvinistic. This happens a lot, right? People have these caricatures of what each tradition actually affirms or what might be unique to those traditions, and they just muddy the waters when it comes to cross-confessional dialogue. So this is one of those examples where, yeah, they think that unconditional election is unique to the Reformed, and so if you say something like Aquinas affirmed the same view that we're affirming, they will respond and say, "Well, it sounds like you're picking and choosing, right? Because Aquinas, did you know Aquinas also believed in transubstantiation? Do you believe in transubstantiation? No, you don't, because you're Protestant, right? So therefore, you're picking and choosing. And in some sense, it is true that people, but this is the case with everybody, that people are, quote, picking and choosing things out of different figures, but they use it to kind of essentially as just this kind of dismissal of what the person is saying, instead of actually engaging with the claim, which is that Aquinas affirmed unconditional election, and then in light of that, correcting their own previous statement in accusing the position of being uniquely reformed, instead of actually adapting their thought to new information, the immediate response is you're picking and choosing. And related to that is also this broader idea of moving the goalposts, right? Because at first they're talking about the position being uniquely reformed. Now, when presented with the reality that it is not, which you see from Aquinas, and this is just one example. There are so many other figures that obviously affirm it, but that's just one example. They don't actually correct themselves. They just respond by saying, "Yeah, you're picking and choosing," and they fail to actually address their mischaracterization of what's actually going on. Second, you have this issue of asking loaded questions, right? This happens all the time. Sometimes it happens in a way where they will demand that you answer with a yes or a no in these loaded questions, but you can also ask loaded questions that allow some type of elaboration, but are still loaded. For example, you believe X, I believe Y. Why do you believe in X if like the Bible teaches Y? Right? There you're asking a loaded question that leaves some room for elaboration, right? It's not just a yes or no. But oftentimes people do demand a yes or no. The classic example, right, going back to, I actually don't know if this is unique to my generation or if people were saying this before, but at least if you grew up in public school, right, the classic question of asking your friends, does your mom, are you, well, first it's, are you gay? And the answer is no. And then the next question is, does your mom know you're gay? The obvious dilemma there is that it leaves you with the option of saying no, which implies that you are, and your mom just doesn't know it, or you just concede the entire point and say yes, um, and that she does know. That's the kind of thing I'm referring to. Thirdly, you have the issue of equivocation, right? So people equivocate all the time in these kind of back and forth discussions. To give an example, right? If I were to say all stars are in the sky, LeBron James is a star, therefore LeBron is in the sky. Now, of course, LeBron does get close to the sky, but he's not literally in the sky. Uh, but you get the point. The equivocation here is on the term star, right, or on the word star. The word stars in the first context refers to whatever the I actually don't know the technical definition, a ball of gas or whatever it is. Whereas the second use of star is referring to athlete, celebrity, whatever. This is something that happens all the time in our context as well. Using theological terms or biblical terms or even just philosophical terms. This happens whenever we have conversations with people about these theological debates. Fourth, you also have this idea that asking for clarification on these equivocations is some kind of intent to distract from the conversation. This could take various forms. Sometimes they will say that that's semantics, that you're playing word games, that you're changing definitions. Either way, there is this kind of poisoning the well where they are trying to accuse you of malintent so that they don't actually have to clarify what they mean by their words or expose themselves as actually being completely ignorant in what they themselves mean when they're using said words because they're actually not engaging in conversations. They are rereading, rehearsing these scripts that they have, which I'll talk more about at the end. But yeah, that's why they don't want to clarify what they mean by the words that they're using. Fifth, you have this failure to distinguish between the principle and its application. In layman's terms, right, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, as they say. Or in other words, throwing the principle out with the application of it that they don't like. For instance, if I were to be having a conversation with someone and we both agree that the taking of a life is justified in self defense, but they were to say, well, that's true, but only if the self defense is inflicted via a handgun or something like that. That if you shoot someone in self defense, that's perfectly legitimate and justified, but not if you stab someone in self defense. That is completely different. Shooting someone is much more civilized, right? To stab someone, that's a little more barbaric. That's completely unjustified to defend yourself with a knife or a blade or whatever it is. It has to be by shooting them. The issue here, as I said, is that they're not distinguishing between a principle and then the application of the principle, such that at times when we're having these theological conversations, they do the same thing where they are criticizing a specific application of the principle when they themselves don't reject the principle. And so it's perfectly fine to affirm some principle and then have these conversations about whether it should be applied this way or that way or whatever. But the problem is more so when they just outright reject the application with no basis. And they reject it in such a way that it sounds as if they're rejecting the principle itself, even though, as I said, this is referring to people that actually don't reject the principle. This is referring to people who are saying, no, you can shoot the person in self defense, not people who would say killing with any weapon is not justified in self defense. Next is when people over exaggerate their interlocutors either position or argument or rebuttal to something. For instance, going back to the Aquinas example, right? If I were to say Aquinas believed in unconditional election, and then the response would be, "Oh, so you're saying Aquinas is a Protestant?" It's like, no, that's not what I was saying. Oh, so you're saying Aquinas believed in tulip, right? These kinds of things, which are just not actual responses. They're not reasonable responses. They are an exaggeration of what the other person is saying, in order to dismiss that easier straw man, right? That straw man that's easier to tear down instead of actually dealing with what was said. You have this tactic, and I do think it's a tactic. And I should have said this in the beginning. I consider these not just habits or quirks or odd behavior. These things are in the list are those things, but they're also debate bro tactics at times. Some of these, at least, I would consider like these debate bro kind of maneuvers. And I think that this is especially one of them because I do think that this one is done with the specific intent to avoid the substance of a conversation, being the derailing of the conversation to focus on the most insignificant point in a statement to avoid the actual contention. So, to give an example of this, if I were to have a friend and come up to him and say, hey man, I saw that you were in your car yesterday, you were wearing a black hoodie, and then I saw you put a mask on and go into a bank, rob the bank, shoot three people, and then drove away around 12 p.m. I saw you do that. And they're like, whoa, whoa, wait, what? I don't I don't even own a black hoodie. What are you talking about? I own a black sweatshirt. I was wearing a black sweatshirt yesterday, but I have no idea what you're talking about. And then I'm like, oh, okay, but okay, so my bad. But that was you that robbed that bank, right? Like, what's that about? And then they're just like, no, no, we can't. We have to deal with this first. Like, we have to get things straight, right? We have to get the facts right. Because I actually didn't go to the bank at 12 yesterday. I was there at like 12:30, but I don't know what you're talking about. I was not there at 12. But I think you get the point, right? They're nitpicking on the most insignificant part of what's being expressed so that they don't actually deal with the purpose of why it's being brought up. Next, you have this really odd thing that people do, which is just self degradation. So if you're having a conversation with somebody and then maybe they kind of realize that they're out of their depth, this happens, especially if languages gets involved. For example, with Greek or Latin, there definitely is this trend among people to, when they see that they're talking to somebody that knows more about the topic than they do, they will just kind of degrade themselves and kind of expose their incompetency. They will bring themselves down. They will even start lifting you up to bring themselves down even more. They'll start calling you a scholar, telling you to, teach me, these kinds of things. But it's not an actual humility, right? And self-degradation is not a virtue. This is specifically being done to just kind of lower the standards of what they're expected to bring forth in the conversation, and to just kind of make you out to seem like the bad guy, like the one that's talking down to him, right? When he or she, themselves they are putting themselves in that position of being spoken down to. They want the condescension so that they look like the good guy in the conversation. Then you have those that claim that something is illogical or doesn't make sense simply because they don't understand the topic. Or you'll have people that don't know what an actual contradiction means. So, to elaborate on that, oftentimes People will say that something is illogical, but I think we can all agree that logic is not really something that is studied by most people today, probably in the world. I don't know that for sure, but I'm safe. I feel safe in saying, at least in the United States, the average person is not actually going to be that familiar with logic. When people say something is illogical, they're really just saying that they don't understand it, and so it must not make sense. Now, you also have the contradiction thing, which is also annoying to deal with because the actual definition of a contradiction is supposed to be something like when you affirm A and not A at the same time and in the same respect or in the same sense, not when things seem to be contradictory but are not being said at the same time and in the same respect. So, for instance, I was recently asked when I was at work, if I prefer the morning shifts or the evening shifts at my job, and the morning shifts, by the way, being at roughly 4:30 in the morning, whereas the evening shifts, from starts more of an afternoon shift to evening, but 4 p.m. to the nighttime. And I said, I like the morning shifts, but I don't like the morning shifts. Now, of course, that seems like a contradiction, but it's being said in different respects, right? So I like the morning shift because I get out of work earlier. I get out at roughly 11, and then I'm free for the rest of the day. And I like that I have that freedom throughout the rest of the day because that's typically when people want to go out and do things or whatever. But I don't like the morning shifts because I don't like to wake up at 4 in the morning, right? I don't like to be at work at 4, 5, 6, 7 in the morning, to be honest. But the point is just, yeah, a contradiction is not when something seems like it contradicts and I don't understand it. Yeah, that's not what a contradiction is. Closing up soon. There's also the accusation that something is out of context, right? People will say that's out of context. This happens whether you are citing a church father, any theologian, medieval, scholastic, Reformed, Roman Catholic, Pope himself, council, scripture itself, whatever the case may be, the accusation, if it's something that they don't like, and if there's some kind of cognitive dissonance going on, the immediate response is that's out of context. Even when they themselves have never read the document or the figure in question, right? The immediate accusation is that it must be out of context because there's some kind of conflict between my belief and what I'm being presented here. So it must be out of context because it can't possibly be that I'm just incorrect, right? So that's always hard to deal with, those people that are not open and willing to receive new information and to actually deal with it. I had an interaction recently with someone on Twitter doing the usual thing about saying that the Catholic Church affirms some kind of predestination, but not the evil version that Calvin has of it. And my response was that that's not actually true, that there's no substantial difference. Specifically, what there are, these little things you could debate, but specifically with respect to what people call double predestination, there is not this substantial difference that the church condemns, which you will find in Calvin. And then I forget what else he tried to say in his responding, but the essence of it was that Calvin actually, his position is condemned. And my response is that you can actually see Roman Catholic scholastics saying things like Calvin did not err in this or that, but he erred elsewhere. And one of the examples is like Jean Baptiste Gournay saying that Calvin did not err in saying that negative reprobation was based on the mere good pleasure of God and that it proceeds not from the merits, right? It precedes, it comes before the foreknowledge of demerits. And so the response from him was, this guy is obscure. You can't just take obscure theologians and say that's Catholic teaching. But at the same time, it's out of context, right? He's obscure, and I've never read him, but I know it's out of context. And last but not least, I save this for last because it's a big one. Is when people start going what I'm going to call bot mode. And so, in short, I think that groups have like their different designated scripts for other groups. So not to pick on the Orthodox, but let's just say you're Eastern Orthodox, you have this script for the arguments that you run or the responses that you give to Roman Catholics, and then another script for the Protestants, maybe another script for the Muslims, whatever it is. You have these different lines that you rehearse and regurgitate to every individual within the group in question, so that you're not really having a conversation with them as an individual when you do actually engage with them and don't just scream at them. But instead, you just regurgitate these lines that you're used to saying to this group. And that's why I call it going bot mode, right? They're like actual bots that are programmed to say these specific things, and they can't get out of them. And honestly, they might be worse than bots because now we have machine learning, and these people do not learn. They don't adapt to any new information, which is what does happen in machine learning. So I'm gonna call it bot mode for now, but with the evolution of technology, they might actually be worse than bots because they can only repeat their scripts ad infinitum, and they can't actually break from them. It's an infinite loop, right? That's an infinite for loop is the comparison I'll make. But yeah, just so that I don't prolong the video and make it too long, I'll end things there and just say that I hope that people can see this, and for one, if you are not guilty of these things, then at least see that there are others of us that see these things, and that you're not alone in thinking that a lot of these people are like insane. And for those that are guilty of these things, then maybe this will make you look back and reflect on your actions and the things that you say online. Or it might help remind us not to do these things. And this might be an obscure reference depending on who you are, but if you guys are familiar with the Joey, I think his name is Joey Swoles, the guy on the internet that stitches videos where people will be in the gym and post some interaction at the gym that they feel where there's some kind of conflict, and they feel like they were justified in recording it to make the other person seem like the bad guy, when in reality it's the person that posted said video that is doing something wrong. So to take from Joey Swole's script, you need to do better. Thanks for watching.